Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to Abnormal Voyages. Today we find ourselves in Waco, Texas, at the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame and Museum. So tag along and saddle up with us as we learn about these Texas heroes.
We're going to a place that you've never heard of before. It's Abnormal Voyages. You're gonna learn something new. We're gonna open new doors. It's Abnormal Voyages.
The Texas Rangers almost seem like something out of myth and legend, and yet they were and are very, very real. As a matter of fact, without the Texas Rangers in history, there's a good chance that the world as we know it could be a very different place. Our story begins back in 1821 with a man named Stephen F. Austin. If you know anything about Texas history, I'm sure this name is very familiar for you, as he was known as the Father of Texas. Now, when they first brought colonists over to the land in Texas, probably about 600 to 800 people, there wasn't an army or anything to really protect them. So, Austin took it upon himself to call the citizens together, and they created a group to help give them protection. He referred to this group as the Rangers, officially in 1823, and as a matter of fact, these very first ones he paid for completely out of his own pocket. Now at this time, the biggest protection that the Rangers offered was from Native Americans in the land who would come in and sometimes start trouble with the colonists who were on their land rightfully, but because the colonists didn't enjoy being chased off or killed, the Rangers were there to help protect them. Soon, the Rangers pretty much had free reign of the entire country when it came to who they were helping out, so their name quickly evolved into the Texas Rangers, as the land they were protecting was the great country of Texas. So technically, Texas wasn't actually a country yet. It was still part of Mexico, but the Texas Rangers name stuck. That does bring us, however, over to the Texas Revolution. This, of course, was led by General Sam Houston against Santa Anna and his troops. While the revolution was going on, rather than being the go-to soldiers for most of the war, the Rangers actually kind of stuck to their original duties and were protecting the people and the settlements against Native American attacks, while the war happened in other places around Texas. On April 21st, 1836, General Sam Houston was finally successful in defeating Santa Anna, and Texas officially became the Republic of Texas, its own country, and General Sam Houston was elevated to becoming Texas's first president. And one of the first laws that President Sam Houston passed was to raise a battalion of almost 300 mounted riflemen who would protect the frontier. This, of course, was pretty much what the Texas Rangers were already doing, so it all rolled up together, and this became some of the first official Texas Rangers. Now, for the first few years, these Texas Rangers continued doing what they were good at, which was protecting the settlements, fighting back against the Native Americans, and just generally keeping Texans safe. After a while, and as their numbers grew, they were sent out to different border areas and pretty much kept all of Texas as safe as they could. They were not officially an army by any means, but they were kind of in that in-between zone between police officers and soldiers. It was a tough life out there on the frontiers, lots of long, hard, and lonely days. But if you succeeded at being a Texas Ranger, there was a lot of glory and honor. The Texas Rangers were some of the best, and they knew how to shoot, how to fight with a knife, how to fight with just their hands, how to navigate throughout the country. They were pretty much your go-to for anything you might need. Being a Texas Ranger was one of the coolest things you could be back then. For anyone who has ever dreamed of being a cowboy, Texas Rangers come pretty close to that stereotypical Western hero vibe. Here at the museum, they do a great job of telling the entire story of the Texas Rangers, starting all the way back with the Texas Revolution.
Of course, Texas is known as one of the only states that ever fought for its freedom and eventually became its own country. In the time when they were rallying for battles, this was their flag, "Come and Take It," of a cannon that they dared the Mexicans to come and take from one of their villages.
Now, as I mentioned before, even though the Texas Rangers didn't directly become soldiers to fight in the Revolution, it doesn't mean that some of them weren't part of it, possibly, or became Rangers after the Revolution had ended. I mean, once you're a soldier, you're pretty much halfway there to being a Ranger. But as time went on, Rangers continued to move on with the times. Their weapons upgraded a little bit, and their tactics may have changed, but at their heart, they were still the same heroic force. All the way up right here to World War I, you can see that Texas Rangers didn't shirk from their duty. They may now have been part of the United States and not the country of Texas, but they still held all the same ideals at heart and knew that they needed to fight for freedom in any form. All this leads us to today, which is modern Texas Rangers, where again, they are kind of in that category of peacekeepers and cops. They definitely don't go to war anymore, but they're still out there trying to protect Texans from anything that may come up against them. Now, sometimes this may mean breaking up illegal gambling rings, perhaps protecting the border, or breaking down drug smuggling rings, things like that. But the point of it is still a huge honor to have that Texas Ranger badge and be representing this society that has had such a great and long legacy here in the state of Texas. As you walk through the museum, it's fascinating seeing all the different things that the Texas Rangers have actually played parts in. Of course, it does range from the very early days of really small-time gambling and things like that, all the way up through more modern-day gangster, almost mafia-type situations. The Texas Rangers really have some fascinating stories in their files. There was case after case of all their different investigation methods. These were some of the early days, and it almost made it seem like the Texas Rangers were spies of sorts. But after you saw kind of this old school stuff, it jumped forward and showed you some of the more modern day things that they use to help fight crime. And I mean, this is just like looking in a display case about CSI or something like that. They have no problem breaking out the technology, the fingerprinting, the computers. They really have evolved with the times, and it's why they're still around today. They're still out there stopping crime, just like they were hundreds of years ago. A really cool aspect of this was there are certain Rangers throughout history that they decided to spotlight, and they had artifacts from their time as a Ranger, be it their weapons, their clothing, accessories, some of them even their saddles for their horses. Very, very cool. And then some of them had painted pictures and just really nice landscapes of, kind of like snapshots into that time period of being a Texas Ranger. You could then get an overall view with a lot of actual pictures, not just paintings, of the history of the Texas Rangers. Some of these items and pictures were, decades old, and they kind of all came together to make up what is the modern day Texas Ranger. The legacy here is just fascinating, and it's easy to see why there are so many legends about them.
The Texas Rangers certainly were larger-than-life figures, and that inspired a slew of heroes in pop culture. Probably none as famous as the one and only Lone Ranger.
Now, as I mentioned, Texas Rangers kind of brought to mind that old romantic notion of the cowboy, the lone guy out there in the prairies, doing whatever he can to make the West a better place. Well, that was a very popular trope, and tons of TV shows and movies have all been made about it, including Walker, Texas Ranger, played by the one and only Chuck Norris. That's not to say that there's not plenty of other Western-themed shows and things out there that have nothing to do with Rangers specifically. But the Texas Ranger mythos definitely adds a fascinating chapter to the genre, and a lot of really cool memorabilia. Here we start with some Lone Ranger Hi-Yo Silver type stuff that big fans of the show could pick up, such as this nice Texas Ranger rocking horse. I mean, who doesn't want that? Of course, the Lone Ranger is probably one of the most famous ever Texas Ranger inspired characters. He's been around for decades. There's been comics, TV shows, radio dramas, movies. Everybody in some aspect or another knows about the Lone Ranger. And a lot of this memorabilia happens to be here at the museum. You've got stuff about Tonto, about the Lone Ranger, anything you might want to know, you can probably find out here, or at least see some great items in really, really good condition. I think some of my favorite things to see here, though, were actual props from the TV show. We had guns that were used on the show, and then the actual mask of the Lone Ranger. I thought that was awesome. His mask and his hat, that is Hollywood royalty. And speaking of heroes, we then come to the actual Hall of Fame part, where they honor all of these men that have made it into the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame. They have their pictures here, or in some cases, nice oil paintings of them, as well as a whole sheet of paragraphs that lay out exactly what these brave souls did to get themselves into this Hall of Legends. As I said at the beginning, the world may be a completely different place without the Texas Rangers. If they weren't there to protect the original colonists in Texas, maybe the revolution never happens. So, Texas never becomes a country, never joins the United States, all of that land stays in Mexico, and we never have the USA the way it is now. I think it's safe to say that a little piece of history was written by the Texas Rangers. Well, that's all the time we have for today, adventurers. If you enjoyed this, make sure you hit that like button, comment below where you'd like to see us go next, and make sure you subscribe. My name is David, and this has been Abnormal Voyages. Thanks for tagging along. We'll see you next time.